Kristen, and you're listening to Podcast and Amplify, a podcast for women entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Welcome back to the show. I'm Kristen, your host. I just wanted to hop on real quick and talk about a couple things for this episode. So first, this is the last episode in my Hispanic Heritage, Latinx Heritage Month series. So all month long, I have had interviews with some really amazing Latinas. These women are phenomenal, and I've had such a great time talking with them, getting to know them, and learning from them. And I know that you will learn a ton from them as well. So I wanted to end strong with my interview with Daisy Lopez. She is a visibility coach for women of color, and she's also a podcast host. She hosts the Liberated Latina Podcast, which is also fantastic. And this conversation that I'm sharing today is actually from a Clubhouse live that we did back in the summer. And I had reached out to her because I wanted to talk about the lack of diversity that I was seeing in the podcasting space and why we need more diverse voices, why we need to hear more from women of color. I reached out to her because she was actually my coach for a time, and she's just fantastic. What she really brought to the conversation was ways that women of color can own their voice, why we need to really turn up the volume on our uniqueness, on who we are, and how we can support ourselves through that process, because it can feel really challenging. It can feel very scary. And so she gives just some really great insights into how to do that. So you'll notice that this interview sounds slightly different from the normal podcast and Amplify format, but it has the same great content. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and thanks for listening.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this super special discussion that we're going to be having today, all about amplifying the women of color voice via podcasting. So it's really cool how this all came about. Kristen is such an amazing podcaster herself, and she even has courses and other resources to help aspiring podcasters. And she came to me and asked if we could host this type of conversation because she's going to share a little bit more about this, but she noticed that there's such a big gap in the podcasting world nowadays. And there's really such a big opportunity to diversify different types of voices from different groups of people and really amplify our own unique impact via the world of podcasting that is growing so rapidly. Like, we look around and we see so many people coming out with their own podcasts because it really is such a great tool. I have a podcast myself, so we're going to really have an honest and frankly really important conversation about what it's going to look like in the future of podcasting and really amplifying different types of voices. So Kristen, thank you so much for approaching me to do this. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My name's Kristen. I am the founder of Explorer and You. So under that umbrella, I am a travel podcaster. And then I also have a course where I help women and women of color entrepreneurs to start and launch their podcasts, because I'm really passionate about all of us women and women of color, like getting our voices out there, because it's really, really needed. And Daisy was my amazing coach, and that's how we connected. She helped me with my launch. So I'm so happy you agreed to chat with me today about this, I think, really important opportunity and topic.
But yeah, if you don't know me, if you're new to the community, if you're anyone who's here on Clubhouse, I'm Daisy. I'm a visibility coach for women of color coaches. And it's really exciting to be able to talk about like us finding our voices here, even in this like kind of aspect of business in the world of podcasting, because as I've worked with women of color coaches and helping them with their marketing and with their messaging and becoming sought after, a huge part of it is really tapping into our unique voice. And what does it look like for us to show up powerfully online and to really not just create a great message that attracts clients, but what does it look like for us to really stand in our truth and create a movement? So I think this is such a beautiful little collaboration to kind of infuse these two sides and deliver incredible content for all of you that are looking to launch your podcast. So Kristen, if you will, explain a little bit about the current landscape that's going on in the podcast world, because I know that even if we open up Apple Podcasts, there's a certain landscape that's going on right now in terms of not really seeing a lot of diverse voices, especially when we look at the top charts, right? So share a little bit about what you've been seeing.
I don't have the numbers, but if you do scroll through, Apple's top rated podcasts, you got to scroll a while before you see women, people of color. It's very skewed in one direction. I do know that 63% of podcast listeners are white. And so a lot of the hosts are white male. And so I just see it as this huge opportunity to share broader perspectives, more voices. Podcasting has reached 100 million in the US, 100 million listeners in the US, and it just continues to grow. So I just think that this landscape is, first of all, not representative of people, our country, people listening, the world, and it has so much room to grow, and there's so much opportunity for us to enter that medium and share perspectives that we're not seeing, we're not listening to. So I just think it's ripe for us to jump in there, jump on it. And the other thing too is, other forms of media are very dictated by numbers. It's this top down, who's in those corporate top positions. It's typically white males, but podcasting, if you're creative, you can kind of do what you want. And it's a low barrier to entry for you to be able to share your voice and your message.
Definitely. And the thing that I love about podcasting is that, yes, of course, it is quickly growing. It's really exploded, and I think it's going to continue to grow. But the thing about podcasting that I really loved is that it allowed me to really just rely on my voice and to kind of strip away from the very aesthetic or physical things that we can get very caught up on in, things like Instagram or Facebook, right? We're writing all this content and we're okay, we have to, position, we have to have nice pictures and we have to kind of play that game. And I know for women of color, especially, there's a lot that goes into being seen, right? Whether it's your skin color, your hair type, or whatever it is, or even just being overly sexualized as women of color. Let's just talk about it, right? Feeling like we have to look a certain way or dress a certain way to be taken seriously. And what I love about podcasting is that it kind of strips that away, and we get to solely really cultivate our voice. And you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but what are the other benefits of jumping into podcasting now? I know it's obviously a growing market, it's a growing industry, the industry of podcasting, but what are some of the other benefits that you see?
We are this visually dependent world, but the kind of magic of it is that sharing your voice with someone and being in someone's ear, that's an intimate experience. So I think from a business standpoint, if you're looking to get that more genuine connection with your community and your listeners, I mean, you're in their ear. There's no other way to, that gets you sort of that connection. You're in people's homes, right? Or you're with them when they're walking. It's just you can go anywhere with you. And so you can really get sort of incorporated into people's lives. I think that's where the sort of uniqueness of the medium, like you were saying, of it just being the voice, is really powerful. But I think when you add in different perspectives, I think my love of podcasting really goes back to storytelling, because I was a lit major, and so I just love stories. And I think what really resonates with me is when I hear someone's story and I think, oh, I had no connection with them. We don't have anything in common. And then they say something and I'm it hits you in that heart place. Oh, we do have something in common. And so I think that the more you hear from different people, it breaks down those barriers, where we can judge people, based on, I guess, what they look like or what our perceptions of them are, can give us more empathy. And it just kind of shows us how we're more similar than we're different. I think when you hear people's stories, you get to hear the nuance, right? The complexity of a person. It makes it harder to stereotype them. And, just having that representation too of like, it's hard to be what you can't see. And so at least for me, like for my travel podcast, I didn't see a lot of traveler, like me, being at the forefront and sharing different voices and stories. And so that was my opportunity to create what I wasn't seeing and what I wanted to see, and be intentional about who am I passing the mic to and whose voices am I highlighting. So, I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but those are just like a few things that are just like really, I think, compelling about podcasting.
Another thing that came up for me as a huge benefit that I've even seen, I've kind of been on like a creative break from my podcast. But the thing with that is that even while we take breaks, right? Like there are still people that find my podcast and binge the whatever, however many 40, 50, I don't even know how many episodes are up, but they just binge the entire thing. And they're like, I feel so connected to you because I've been able to kind of follow your journey and like follow the kind of like growth of the show from the very beginning. The first episode usually, and you can talk about it when you give like some tips on how to get started, but usually what I see is that the first few episodes are somebody's like story, right? Like them kind of sharing like why am I here? What's the why behind the show? What's the why behind my mission? And that in and of itself is so powerful, and somebody can really feel so connected to you within 30 minutes, so much so that they're choosing to spend hours with you in their ear, as you mentioned, like really getting to know your story. And it's it lives there forever, right? Like it's something that is so easy to get started, and it doesn't need to be perfect when we get started. It doesn't need to be uber professional and, all the bells and whistles. It just gets to be you and your voice. And I think as women of color, that's so powerful for us to really utilize these opportunities that generations before didn't have, to get our stories out there. And it's work that gets to live there and whatever platforms you choose, and people can continuously find you and feel connected to you even when you're not working on it, even when you're not intentionally growing your podcast.
Yeah, that's such a great point that, it's there for people to consume when they want. And you're right, that story, people's story, it's just the hook, right? And what you're giving people too is kind of like that moment of discovery. Like, isn't that the fun part where you're like I just discovered, and I don't know, it's been around for a little bit, but it's Latina to Latina, that podcast. I'm like binging it right now, just like what you're saying. But I like just like that, giving that moment of like, oh, this is a great, thing that I'm going to bring into my life is like, that's the fun part too. Hey explorers, we'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I wanted to take just a few seconds to invite you to the free workshop that I created. It's called The 3 Secrets to Starting Your Successful Podcast. Now, it's all about helping you to start your dream podcast so that you can share your voice and expand your business. If you want to join, just go to exploreryou.com. It's totally free. All right, friend, back to the show.
Yeah, it creates brand loyalty. And it's so important that we think about, right? When we think about branding, a lot of times we think about the aesthetic pieces, but honestly, one of the most important aspects of our branding is how are we going to differentiate ourselves, and how are we really going to, again, not just create a message, but create a movement, right? Create like a community. And a lot of times that's in us, like really leaning into our unique voice and your story, your why, the way in which you communicate what you've gone through, the way in which you communicate the lessons and the value that you want to offer your people. That's your, like, I know everyone uses the term secret sauce, but that's the secret sauce. Like that is your branding, because at the end of the day, like anybody can create a logo, anybody can create, all those different assets, but nobody can replicate your own voice, whether that's podcasting or even like written, right? Like how we communicate our story, our message, what we want to help other people with, or what we want to share with the world. So powerful. I want you to share a little bit about, like, for somebody that's watching this and they're like, oh, I've been thinking about a podcast, but I don't know. Because I think a lot of people think that it has to be really complicated. Like I've spoken to a lot of people and like, I've been sitting on it for a while, but I need to hire like this whole marketing agency to get a podcast out, and they think it becomes this big thing, something that gets to be so like simple and profound quickly becomes really overwhelming for people. So I think it'd be really useful for them to hear from you as somebody who's gone through this process and also teaches this, like, what are some of the things that they should keep in mind when they are, so they can see how accessible their dream is of launching a podcast.
For me, I 100% believe in this, and this is how I started my podcast, but you really do have to start with your why, because that is a lot of times the big difference between like success and failure, or between thinking about something and doing it, right? Like you need that. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my business? Who am I trying to reach? What is my like unique value add? Like what am I bringing to people? So that's where I tell people to start. And I have a workbook that has prompts that can walk people through that to make it easier. But it's so important to start there, because once you come up with like that vision, you write your vision for that podcast, that's what's going to keep you motivated, right? Because you're going to write something that's like not just connected to your business, but it's connected to who you are, and it's aligned with your values and your brand and your mission. And that's what's going to like kind of push you over like the overwhelm and the fear, which is totally normal, right? Because it's something new that we're doing. And, when we do something new, we kind of get confronted with a lot of things. But when you have that why, and that's what you're going towards, it helps you show up every day consistently. It helps keep you motivated when you have those days of like, I don't want to do this. This is scary. This is out of my comfort zone. And then understanding like your why for your business. You want something that you can pull out for other, not just a podcast, but you can create a blog or you can create social media posts. Do you want something that's going to turn your listeners into customers by creating that brand loyalty? So knowing those goals too and setting up metrics is super important. You want to be able to measure your growth and your outcomes, and that also keeps you motivated. So I encourage everyone to start there, and then really everything you create for your podcast after that kind of flows from there. Like you're going to need a summary, and so you can pull that from your why. You're going to need artwork. Well, you're going to be really inspired by like what you've just written, and you're going to kind of have that feel of what do you want it to look like. Your content show ideas. You'll be able to think really intentionally about like who do you bring on your show and what do you want to tell them. So I really think it's important to start there, because everything just will feel more like with ease and flow when you have that clear vision.
And we know we're here for the ease and flow. This is a Liberated Latina community over here. This is not like overworked, stressed out, and hustly community. Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. When we are, and I think that applies for everything in business, honestly. Like when we are connected and when we're dropped in, the details just become an extension of our alignment. Like it just becomes a natural progression. If things are feeling stuck, like even if somebody were to say, I want to start this podcast, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, and I've been sitting on it, like I'm always like, what's the fear? What are you avoiding feeling? Because the actual act of a podcast can be so simple. And of course, there's amazing people like you who are here to facilitate that process. So really, what are you afraid of feeling? What are you afraid of experiencing? What is that resistance protecting you from? And I guess what I'll piggyback off, because you're clearly the podcast master as far as like the technicalities and things. But what I would like to offer on the other side of that is just some tips around sharing your voice, right? And especially for women of color, whether it's podcasting, whether it's going live, whether it's stepping on stage, whether it's whatever it is, there's an element that is so often overlooked. And it kind of ties into what I mentioned earlier around feeling that fear and feeling that resistance. It's completely normal, because if we look like generations past, we haven't done things like this really in a large way, in kind of like the big picture, on a big scale. Really, we haven't done things like this, sharing our stories, having this voice that can reach millions of people. it feels heavy because our nervous system is literally not used to this. And since it's not something that we're used to, and it's not something that we even see a lot, we're not really modeled. You had one line that was so profound, like, we can't be what we don't see, or something. That was like gold. Of course, because we're like, this feels unsafe. So my first go-to step is to cultivate that safety within yourself. The safety that we think that we need from money, from likes and comments, from anything, validation, anything external, it's never really the case. We can create that safety internally within ourselves, regardless of the circumstance. So as you're creating your podcast, and as you're taking action on the things that Kristen so beautifully outlined, like thinking about your why, I would also encourage you to think about, how are you going to create safety for yourself as you start this new adventure? How are you going to be there for yourself? How are you going to come back home to safety no matter what? Because of course, like, this is something that can feel very scary and confronting. And if we don't have like that sense of like that compass home of what is that safety going to look like and feel like for me, how can I cultivate that in under any circumstance? That's when like that's when you're gonna have to feel like you have to push yourself. And it's almost like re-traumatizing your nervous system. Like, no, go. Like, we re-shame ourselves. And you're never gonna feel safe in podcasting or doing anything else if you're just there because you're shaming yourself there. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
100% makes sense. And I love that you called that out, because I was someone who just like just do it. And like, you gave me that grace to just be like, no, just honor that you're doing these things. And I think a lot of us, we're really hard on ourselves too, is the other part. So just giving yourself that kindness that you're talking about it's just so lovely and important.
Yeah. It's something that is so vastly different than what we're even brought up to think is possible for us. It's like, at least for me, I won't speak for everyone, but it's like, you grow up, you get a corporate job, and like, you kind of follow that path. So of course it's totally normal for these fears to come up. Of course it's totally normal to be like, what if I get it wrong, right? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I offend people? And my response to that is, good. It just means you're doing something different. It just means you're really leaning into your power. And when we step into that, our authentic voice, and when we step into our power, it activates people. There's no way around it. It activates people. But again, if we really take time to think about, where does my internal safety lie? How can I create that for myself? You're golden. You're going to have that to guide you all the way through. Because of course it's inevitable that your podcast is going to grow, right? Like, we're here to not just settle for the average. So having that home base is super important. Another thing I'll say is turning up the volume on your authentic voice is key, especially in podcasting, right? Because it's just your voice. That's what they really connect with. That's what they hear. And I know for me, I felt like I had to like tone down my accent, I guess, for a while, because I thought that, no, this Miami accent, I'm talking about business, nobody's gonna take me seriously. And I learned that actually the little nuances of the way that I said things, actually, like, people liked it. Like, I would have people be like, oh my gosh, it's so funny how you say this way. Or like, even my coach, I just started saying like just different phrases that I always say. She's like, I love that you say that. And I didn't even notice that was something that I uniquely did that she's never heard before. That's part of your branding. That's what people are so endeared with. That's what they really connect to. And the more that you can turn up the volume on your voice, exactly how you say things, like, no need to whitewash your voice, no need to whitewash how you say things. Like, your podcast gets to be that super genuine extension of you, and it just adds to your brand credibility, really, because they know when people come to you, they know that who you're being on your podcast is exactly what they're going to get if they choose to work with you, if they choose to reach out to you, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And, I encourage people to like listen to different podcasts before they start theirs, but more from like I guess a producing standpoint, right? Like, how do you want to come in? Do you want to come in with like music behind you, or do you want it just be your voice? Like just from that standpoint. But I always tell people, like, not for like your delivery, right? And it's good to hear how people deliver things and, oh, okay, that's, take notes. But I think what you're saying, like in terms of like your voice and just being yourself and having those quirks or sayings or whatever's, feels genuine to you is way more important than sounding like polished. But yeah, I agree with you that like just having your own voice, it's really going to set you apart, because podcasting is a crowded space, but I don't think it's crowded for Black and brown voices. I don't think it's crowded. I think that there's such a space that we can take up and own. And I love how you talk about owning your space and like how we can just step into that and be 100% confident that that's what people need to hear, how we say something from our unique perspective and voice.
So if anybody here got anything from that, she specifically said there's so much space. Yes, podcasting is growing, and it's, everyone loves to like talk about how it's saturated, right? Everything's so saturated. But the time is now, especially for people of color, to band together and to really raise their voice, literally raise your voice. And if you have a calling to start a podcast, if you have a calling to get your voice out there, I did it. It was so healing for me. And I saw how much more intimacy and connection was formed with my community. And again, it's such an incredible business tool. And if you're feeling the pull to do it, that means that it is the right time. Like the part of you that says it's not the right time is really fear, because you get to kind of come in and create a space that you get to lead as the industry grows. And that's so powerful. So Kristen, where can they lean into your support? Where can they, if they have any questions about getting started with their podcast, where can they find you? How can they work with you? All the things.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I'm at Podcast Explorers with an S.
You can also follow me on Instagram at the Liberated Latina.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Podcast and Amplify. Wasn't Daisy just really wise and insightful? I just loved talking to her, and I've loved talking to all the other brilliant Latinas that have been on my show. This has been such a wonderful opportunity this month to highlight the awesome knowledge and wisdom and work that these Latinas are doing. And it's been my honor to have them on the show. This is the last week of Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month. I hope that you've been able to catch some of the episodes, but they are up and available on the new podcast and amplify.com website. So you can go and check all of those out there. And while this is the last interview in this series, don't worry, I have so many great interviews in store for you, and I'm excited to share them. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe so you don't miss a show. And rating and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help support us. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.